Most people never name the mistake. That is the strangest part of it. They live inside it for years, sometimes for decades, and they feel its effects every single day. The quiet tightness, the low-grade anxiety, the sense that their financial life never quite settles into the peace they expected. But they never find the right words for what is actually wrong. They blame the market. They blame their income. They blame decisions made years ago that cannot be undone. And all of that blame, directed outward and backward, keeps them from seeing the one thing that is actually causing the problem right now, today, in the present tense. My name is Richard Harlow. I have spent more than 4 decades sitting across from people who built real things, careers, families, savings, lives, and who arrived at 60 or 65 with more than most people ever accumulate, and still felt financially unsteady in a way they could not explain. And after all those conversations, after all those years of looking at where the money actually goes, and why the peace never fully arrives, I have come to believe that there is one mistake. Not 5, not 10, one, that sits underneath almost all of the financial discomfort that people experience in the second half of their lives. The mistake is this: they are still managing money the way they managed it at 40. Not in every detail, but in the fundamental orientation, in the deep psychological posture toward money itself, in what they are trying to do with it, what they are afraid of, and what they believe they still need to achieve. They have not updated. And the financial world they are living in at 65 is so profoundly different from the world they were navigating at 40 that using the same orientation is a little like using a map of one city to navigate another. The streets do not match. The landmarks are wrong. And no matter how carefully you follow the map, you keep ending up somewhere you did not intend to be. I want to take you back to a specific afternoon in the winter of 2006. I was sitting with a man named Charles, 67 years old, retired civil engineer, the kind of person who had been careful and precise his entire professional life. Charles had done everything correctly by any standard I could apply. He had saved consistently. He had invested prudently. He had kept his expenses below his income for 30 years. He had arrived at retirement with enough, genuinely enough, to live well for the rest of his life, without ever needing to work again. And yet Charles was miserable. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who did not know him well, but in that particular way that careful people are miserable when the thing they work toward does not feel the way they expected it to feel when they arrived. He sat across from me that afternoon and said with the kind of flatness that comes from having said something to yourself many times before you say it to someone else, "I spent 30 years building toward this. I do not understand why I still feel like I'm behind." I asked him what he meant by behind. He thought about it for a long moment, and then he said, "I feel like I should be doing more, building more. Like if I'm not growing the money, it's going to disappear." That sentence stopped me, because it was not a description of a financial problem. It was a description of an identity that had not updated. Charles had spent 30 years being a person who was building toward a goal. That building, the accumulating, the protecting, the disciplined deferral of present comfort for future security, had become not just a strategy, but a self-concept. It was who he was. And retirement had not changed that self-concept. It had only removed the context in which it made sense. So Charles kept doing at 67 what had made him feel purposeful and secure at 42. Chasing growth, protecting against loss, always orienting toward the horizon, even though the horizon had already arrived. Even though he was already standing in the place he had been building toward all that time. This is the mistake I see more consistently than any other among people over 60. Not a bad investment, not a reckless decision. The failure to recognize that the goal has changed, that the work of the first half of financial life, accumulation, growth, protection, is fundamentally different from the work of the second half, which is conversion. Learning to use what you have built. Learning to live inside it rather than continuing to build its walls. The consequences of this mistake are more significant than most people realize, because they operate simultaneously on two levels. The first level is financial. When you continue to orient your money primarily toward growth, at a stage of life when you should be orienting it toward income and stability, you expose yourself to risks that are no longer appropriate for your time horizon. A market correction at 42 is an inconvenience, or even an opportunity. The same correction at 68, depending on your withdrawal rate and your portfolio positioning, can permanently alter the trajectory of your financial life in ways that are genuinely difficult to recover from. The risk that felt like normal cost of doing business during the accumulation years becomes a different kind of risk entirely when you are no longer adding to the pile. When every drawdown comes directly from the resources you are living on. But the second level is the one that took me longer to understand, and in some ways it costs people more. When you remain in accumulation mode after the accumulation phase has ended, you do not just take on inappropriate financial risk. You also deny yourself the life that all of that accumulation was supposed to fund. I have seen people with genuinely sufficient resources, people who could comfortably afford to travel, to be generous with the people they love, to live with a quality of daily life that their savings could easily sustain, living instead with the kind of careful self-denial that made sense when they were 35 and building towards something. Eating the cheaper option, skipping the trip, declining the invitation, not because they cannot afford the alternative, but because the accumulation mindset cannot distinguish between saving during the building years and depriving yourself during the living years. To an orientation that was built around the idea that every dollar saved is a dollar earned, spending always feels like a retreat. I watched this cost Charles something real over the 8 years I knew him after that winter conversation. He never fully made the shift. He improved. We worked together. And he began drawing from his savings more freely, began making choices from a position of sufficiency rather than scarcity. But the deep orientation never completely transformed. He died at 75, having lived, by his own acknowledgement in our last few conversations, more cautiously than his resources had required. He had the means for a larger life. He had spent too long building the habits of a smaller one. He said something to me in one of those last conversations that I have thought about many times since. He said, "I think I was so focused on not running out that I forgot to actually use what I had." Those two things feel like they should be the same, but they're not. Not running out is about the money. Using it is about the life. That distinction between not running out and actually using what you have built is, in my experience, the central financial work of the years after 60. And it is work that most people never do, not because they are lazy or uncaring, but because nothing in their financial education ever told them that the orientation that served them so well for 30 years would eventually need to be set aside. Nobody told them that the map would change. Nobody told them that the skills that built the house were not the same skills needed to live in it. The practical implication of this is not complicated, but it requires an honesty that can be uncomfortable. It requires sitting down at some point and asking yourself not how do I protect what I have, but what is this money actually for now? What does it need to do for me in the years I have ahead? Not in the abstract, not as a general statement about security, but specifically and personally. What experiences? What relationships? What quality of daily life? What freedom of choice does your financial situation need to be enabling, right now, today, in the life you are actually living? Because the accumulation years have an answer to that question built in. The money is for the future. The money is for the goal you are building toward. The deferral is the point. But after 60, the future has arrived. The goal has been reached. And the only honest answer to what the money is for now is the one that most of us were never taught to give. It is for the life you are living. It is for now. I want to ask you something before you go. If you could be fully honest with yourself, with no judgment, no defensiveness, just clarity. Are you living in the house you built? Or are you still standing outside it, adding to the walls? Leave me your answer in the comments. I read every one. And I think that question, taken seriously, might be worth more than anything else we could discuss today.